Hi, and welcome to the Crush Your Sugar Cravings Summit. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Keesha Ewers. She is an integrative medicine expert, doctor of sexology, family practice ARNP, psychotherapist, herbalist, is board certified in functional medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, and is the founder and medical director of the Academy for Integrative Medicine Health Coach Certification Program. Dr. Keesha has been in the medical field for over 30 years. After conducting the HERT study in 2013, Healing Unresolved Trauma, she developed the HERT model for understanding how past childhood trauma impacts our adult health. This led to the creation of You Unbroken online program for patients to heal their own trauma, and the Mystic Medicine Deep Immersion Healing retreats that she leads at her home in San Juan Island, Washington. Dr. Keesha is a popular speaker and has been on TED Talk stage. She is a best-selling author of Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, The Women's Guide to Reclaiming Emotional Freedom and Vibrant Health. Also, the Quick and Easy Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook, Inflammatory Recipes with 7 ingredients or less for busy people, and Your Libido Story, a workbook for women who want to find, fix, and free their sexual desire. You can listen to her Mystic Medicine radio show and find her programs at drkeesha.com. Well, thanks for joining us today. It's good to have you.
It's my pleasure, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's jump right into the questions. I know one of your things is you have like the 5 root causes of disease, and one of them is your story. So I thought we'd start out with having you tell us a little bit about your story, how you got into health and wellness.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. This is really interesting, this idea of, the mystery behind whatever it is that's bothering you, whether it's sugar cravings or it's weight issues or it's an autoimmune disease or cancer or depression or anxiety or insomnia, any of it, a hormone imbalance, that you can always find that root cause in your physical system, and your emotional, your mental, your spiritual, or inside your story. So when I listen to my patients tell their stories, I'm always listening to the words they use. I've been fighting with my body, my whole life, or I've had this thing that whatever it is, my weight issue or this rash since childhood, right? Or constipation since childhood. I always can hear it in the story. And it is kind of fascinating because we all have a story, and mine definitely is no exception. I was in a real high intensity intensive care unit environment as a nurse when I was 19 years old, all the way until I was 30 years old. And during that time I got married, I had 4 children, I started running marathons, and was very active, loved skydiving, kind of a adrenaline junkie sort of person. And then, my friends always called me the Energizer Bunny. And then this experience happened where it felt like all of a sudden I got sick, where one day I went to bed to go to sleep at night. The next morning I woke up and I had 10 extra pounds of puffiness all over my body, and my joints were red and inflamed and swollen and painful. And it was like someone had taken the batteries out of the Energizer Bunny. And I thought, wow, what happened here? And so I got in to see a doctor. And during the course of the history taking, she asked me if I had any history in my family of autoimmune disease. And I said, yeah, actually, I think my grandfather had rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, he was in a wheelchair for some of his years and died around 55. And I'm 55 now. So he died around the age that I am now. And she said, okay, well, this is rheumatoid arthritis that you have. And then she just kind of wrote me out 2 prescriptions and handed them to me and said, so take these, and when you get worse, not if you get worse, come back and we'll change your meds, And I said, well, hang on, time out. I'm very disciplined. I make my own food. I'm a very healthy person. I'm happy to do whatever it takes, to do what I need to do for this. And she said, oh no, it's genetic. You basically drew the short straw and the genetic lotto, my dear. Close the book, put it on the shelf. There's nothing more to say. Come back when you get worse. And so on my way home, I just remember thinking there has to be something besides what my model of medicine was Western medicine. I always tell people, like, I would have never even known an herb if it had bitten me in the butt. Like, I just didn't even know anything about alternative medicine or what's called alternative medicine today. So I went home and I started doing some research with my dial-up modem. This was 25 years ago. And there was no Google. It was Ask Jeeves in those days, right? And found an article in PubMed, where we keep our medical research for people in the medical field. And it was on yoga being beneficial for people with autoimmune disease. Now, mind you, there was not a yoga studio on every corner next to Starbucks the way there is today, right? It was not so well known. And so I found a yoga studio, went to my first yoga class, and the teacher said enough about this word that it intrigued me, and it was Ayurvedic medicine. He talked about Ayurveda. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. I've never heard of this. So I went home again, got on the internet and started looking for like what this was. And it really sat me back on my heels because, first of all, it's sort of a revolutionary concept for this little standard Western model of medicine girl, was that we're all different. And actually the same diet is not right for every single person, no matter what the flavor, whether it's keto or paleo or vegan or whatever, we all have our own unique constitution, and we're supposed to match ourselves to that. And, the way we water ourselves and sleep ourselves and feed ourselves and exercise ourselves actually should be personalized to our unique composition. The other thing that Ayurvedic medicine revealed to me that was really interesting was that autoimmune disease is undigested anger. And I just remember kind of going, undigested anger? What are you talking about? Like, how do you digest an emotion? I didn't even have any like way of grappling with that. And then the second part of it, anger, I'm not an angry person, and then I started really thinking about that and thinking, but actually that's probably a problem, that I don't do anger. Like, I don't express it. I don't allow myself to feel it. So where does it go? Oh, it's locked in my body. So through the course of attending yoga classes and learning about Ayurveda, I became a yoga teacher and learned how to meditate. And one day I was in meditation and this word autoimmune kept dancing in front of my third eye space. And I just remember looking at it and going, auto, oh, that actually means I'm attacking me. And there's nothing else to blame, just me. My immune system is going after me. So then that was a really, life-altering moment too. And I have to see if he's going to stop here. And so I thought, okay, so when is the first time that I wanted to die? Because I didn't want to die right now, right? So but I was killing myself literally. So I thought I must have had something happen. So I went back in my meditation and followed this little breadcrumb trail backwards and looked for the first time that I wanted to die. And, I found her. She was a 10-year-old little girl version of myself who was being sexually abused by the vice principal of my elementary school. And I remember, like, when I saw her in my meditation, it was in Florida, sitting under a palm tree on a balcony at our, I lived on a naval air station. My dad was in the Navy, and she just didn't understand anything that was happening in her world and wanted out. And she didn't have language to tell people what was going on, but had tried, told my mom I really didn't want to go back to school, that I was frightened. I had headaches and stomach aches, which I was such a good student. And the vice principal was telling me that it was my fault, that I was a bad kid. I was like one of two white girls in an all black school. And he was telling me, I was white trash and that I was bad. And so this was stuff I couldn't understand, right? So I just remember looking at her and going, oh, this has to be connected. This has to be connected. So I went right into therapy. I never did take those medications. I started working with this past trauma. And my rheumatoid arthritis was gone in 6 months.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's never been back in 25 years. Now, I always tell people I was a sugar addict at that time.
Mm.
When I would get home from school, which was horrific for me in that 1 year, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mom would have some freshly baked, beautiful dessert, homemade, sitting on the counter. That would be my after school snack. So it was totally like, oh, I'm safe. Here's this food that locks it into my body sensation, right? It's sugar. So every time I got stressed out, I would eat sugar. And the reason I started running marathons was to control my weight. So I was basically an exercise anorexic. I would run 15 miles the next day so I could have 5 brownies the night before.
Yeah.
If I had a particularly bad day, right? I would make a beautiful dessert for my children, and I would have some too, and then run and run and run and run to keep my weight down. So, I was really beating my body into the ground and didn't know that there was anything wrong with that. So it was really interesting to start to unpack, oh, this trigger of sugar actually helps upregulate my genetic problem with dopamine, which I have. I always do genetic testing on every one of my patients because it's really interesting to see what biochemical genetic links that you have that actually pull you towards sugar, as well as who's living in your microbiome and what your hormone levels are doing, right?
Yeah.
So I discovered that and went, oh, no wonder, right?
Yeah.
And have been off of sugar ever since then. It's 25 years. But I have ways that I can cook. You mentioned my cookbook, the quick and easy autoimmune paleo cookbook. It has ways that you can make like beautiful, wonderful foods that taste delicious that don't use sugar. And so it's not like we don't bake in my house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was wondering is, are you kind of on, I know there's people that are, so you have to be totally off sugar, or some people say, oh,
I'm
once in a
an
while.
addict. And so, and my genetics show why. Like I have so many dopamine challenges in my genetics. And so I can't do like my my husband always says, well, moderation, anything in moderation is fine, right? I'm like, moderation is not in my vocabulary. It's I can't, well, I'm not one of those people. Kathleen Desmaisons, do you know who she is?
Oh, no.
She wrote a book, and years ago I read it. It's called Potatoes Not Prozac.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, so she has this little, I have a radio show and I interviewed her a couple times, and she has this little cookie test in her book, right, where she tells the story. Yeah. She says, whenever I go give talks in front of large groups of people, I always do the cookie test. And she says, here's how it goes. So you're driving along, you've had a really hard day at work, you're exhausted, you're hungry, and you're driving along and you think, oh, I just want a really good meal and then I want to go to bed. Or a bath and a good meal and go to bed. Oh, that sounds wonderful. So you're driving along and you think, gosh, I don't have the food that I want to have a really good meal at home. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to get something and I'm going to go into a nice restaurant, order a nice meal for myself. This has been a tough day. So you go in and you have, a beautiful wild caught grilled salmon with a big pile of broccolini and some warm lemon water. This is one of my favorite meals at a restaurant locally here.
Sounds good.
And you feel very, very satisfied and you go, okay, now I can go home, take my bath and go to bed. So you're driving home and you get home and you've got your mind on filling that bathtub, but you walk through the door and you smell freshly baked chocolate chip cookies or whatever is your favorite cookie. Yeah. And you look over at the kitchen counter and there are rows and rows of these freshly baked homemade cookies cooling on the cooling rack that your daughter just made. And so what do you do? And so that's the test, right? And she says the response from the audience is very interesting. She says half the room, you'll hear half of the people in there scattered around the room laughing. Yeah. And then the other half looking at the people that are laughing going, what's funny? And she said, those of you that are laughing know that you're an addict. You will walk in and you go, oh, freshly baked cookies. Well, of course I have to have 3 or more, right?
Yeah.
Because they're just hot out of the oven. They smell delicious. They've turned on every receptor of desire that you
Yeah.
have, right? And it doesn't matter that you're full and you're content and you
Mm,
actually don't need anything else in your body. Your body's fine. It's got all the nutrients that it needs. And really all you wanted was a bath and bed. But
okay.
now that you smell the cookie, you've turned on all your receptors and
Yeah.
you want the cookie, right? And
Yeah.
so when I read that and I thought, yeah, I'm one of the ones that would have laughed in the auditorium, I came home and I told my kids about this. And I said, so from now on, what I want you to treat me like I'm an alcoholic, which
Yeah.
means that after work, when I come home, you can't have a ice cold beer sitting on the kitchen counter for
Yeah.
me,
Right.
and say, well, limit yourself to one, because
Yeah.
that's not what an alcoholic can do. And so
Mhm.
I said, if you guys want a treat, then we'll go to a restaurant. You can order dessert, and then that's it. We won't keep anything in the house. So that was my first foray into removing all sugar from our house.
Yeah.
Then I started learning how to cook in a way that, now we can cook and we can bake and we can actually have cookies drying or cooling on the countertop that don't turn on your sugar receptors and
Mm,
are, healthy and wholesome and
right.
delicious. And so we've all like learned how to cook in this way that's totally amazingly nutritious. But, in a grocery store, I don't ever, ever, ever buy anything that has sugar in it.
Yeah.
I just don't. So I treat myself like I'm a sugar addict because that's exactly. And I have a long line of sugar addicts that I come from, my
Yeah.
parents, everybody. There's a
Yeah.
story of my grandmother sitting in Wyoming in the winter time on the radiator heater eating a bowl of ice cream with hot fudge over it,
Yeah.
saying, you know what? I don't care if it's cold or if it's winter. The first course of every meal ought to be ice cream with chocolate sauce.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of the way my family dynamic was. And so, I realized, oh my gosh, I come from this genetic line of dopamine problems. And
Yeah.
so therefore, let's make sure we treat this very seriously and be very conscious about it, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Good information. I also wanted to touch on, because I know you do some work with autoimmune disease. So do you think there's a sugar autoimmune disease connection that people
The
should look at?
connection there are connections. So one of
Mhm.
them is that sugar is one of the most inflammatory substances on the planet. So as long as you've got some form of inflammatory whatever in your body, whether for me it was joints, right? I wrote a book called Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, and in it there's a graphic that has a bucket, and it has every autoimmune disease that you can name, and there are over 150 of them. So, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, Raynaud's, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, all of these different autoimmune diseases. I just pile them into the same bucket. And on the front of the bucket, you could just say inflammation, right? They're
Yeah.
all an inflammatory response where the immune system is attacking one organ or tissue in your body for each disease. And so once you have one autoimmune disease, statistics show you have a 75% chance of
Mm.
developing another one and another one and another one. And it's not because you're just that sick. It's because you've never gone and started really chatting with your immune system and finding out why it's behaving like a dog with rabies and biting you,
Mm.
attacking you. So you have to get underneath that. And then all of the autoimmune diseases can reverse. I always tell my patients and students, like, I could get rheumatoid arthritis back. Probably it would take me under 6 months to get it to come
Oh.
roaring back. I haven't cured it. What I
Mm.
have done is reversed it. So this idea that you have to keep inflammation down in your body so that any weak areas that you have genetically or functionally from the toxic environment we live in and your organs of detoxification perhaps not keeping up with the toxic load in the environment.
Mm.
Sugar is just one more toxin that can tip the scale and create a flare. There are some autoimmune diseases that are of really even more risk for having it tip into a flare when you eat sugar. Hashimoto's thyroiditis is one. Another is MS, lupus, like, and all the diabetes, right? That
Yeah.
any of these, sugar will activate these inflammatory cascade responses, which then causes, you want your immune system to be like a friendly, cuddly dog, not a dog with rabies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So I know you also work with people a little bit on emotional health and past traumas. Do you think someone should start with more of the diet and the sugar area or the emotional
What I
component?
find is that a lot of times people believe that stopping sugar is a matter of willpower, and then they feel
Yeah.
really bad about themselves when they're not successful under that mode, right? That framework.
Mhm.
And I don't really think it's a matter of willpower. Any research on willpower tells us that there are several studies out of Harvard that, that show this, that you kind of have like a bucket of willpower. And by the time if you work, by the time you leave for work in the morning, you've already kind of exhausted it through
Mm.
getting on email and social media. And we have so many stimuli, these
Yeah.
that we're exposed to that require willpower for us to get back on track, to get up and not just drop into your email or sit and have a cup of coffee instead of going and exercising. There's
Mhm.
just so much willpower that you can actually use before it's gone. So this idea that it's a matter of willpower gets people into some serious trouble. So the way that I think about it is that you think, okay, what are the receptors that get turned on where you've got this like magnet for sugar? So one of them I've already mentioned, neurotransmitter called dopamine. Another is, in your digestive tract, you have over 100 trillion little microscopic bugs,
Mm.
and that's called your microbiome. And the ones that are more pathogenic, we call them, that create what we call dysbiosis. It's a mismatch of the good guys to the bad guys, you could say. The bad guys like sugar. And so if you have more of those present, they're going to wake up in the middle of the afternoon, and where you've said, today I am going to stick to my food plan. I never use the word diet. And then by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're like rummaging through the pantry looking for anything. Chocolate chips? Is there anything in here that's sweet, right?
Yeah.
And so that's your microbiome that can be causing that. Another one is if you have a hormone imbalance with adrenal fatigue and you're just exhausted and you do start your day with coffee. Well, coffee is one of the worst things that you can drink. Aside from alcohol and coffee both start your pancreas on a blood sugar roller coaster that's really hard to manage, and it just goes up and down and crashes. And so when you have the high of the caffeine and then you crash, most people will reach for the short chain carbohydrate to bring themselves back up again, to get their brain functioning so they can focus and concentrate and stay on task. That's not actually, your body's not deficient in sugar and it's not deficient in caffeine. That's going to be something going on with the little engines in your cells called mitochondria that we can test for and see what's going on with them. It could be a genetic issue with something called methylation, where you're not converting your food into energy properly. It's not a deficiency in caffeine. It could be because you have been stressed for so many years from past trauma and have nervous system reactivity pathways set up that as long as they're getting pushed, you wind up in the space where fight, flight, or freeze, right? Over the years, what will happen if you're always, this is always from perceptions, okay? So you perceive yourself as chronically stressed or overwhelmed, or your little feelers are always looking for, am I safe? Do people respect me? Am I loved? Just always looking for something to go wrong. Then that's a hypervigilance that will occur inside your system. And that sends a message from your brain to your adrenals whenever you perceive yourself as not being safe or not being cherished or loved or emotionally connected or whatever it is, then your adrenals will send cortisol out into your system so you can fight the saber-tooth tiger or flee from it or freeze and play possum. So if that cascade, that nervous system biochemical cascade keeps getting stimulated over and over again, over the years, what will happen is your body knows that survival wins over reproduction. So your adrenals will start to steal from your progesterone stores as a woman and your testosterone stores as a male. And so then you'll wind up estrogen dominant for both genders. So you don't have enough testosterone, you don't have enough progesterone because your body's using those to create cortisol so you can just survive. Estrogen dominance actually causes you to crave sugar.
Yeah.
It also is set up in this way because of past trauma that your perceptual fields are constantly looking for. And so we have to go in and restructure how you perceive and how your nervous system reacts. Otherwise, I call this fixing the hole in the bottom of the boat. Your hormones never do get regulated. It doesn't matter if you take hormones, if the hole is still there and you're still producing too much cortisol, then you're still going to have this problem. So trauma plays it, I call it the missing piece of the puzzle. It's the one that's really never properly addressed. It's being talked about more and more, but it's not being dealt with still in a way that folds it into the whole picture, right? Where your hormones are being treated, your adrenals are being treated, your nervous system pathways are being retrained, your genetics are looked at, and your mitochondria are looked at, and then also you're doing some lifestyle behavioral changes at the same time.
Yeah. Wow, great information. Wonderful stuff for people to use. And these interviews go so fast. It's already been almost 30 minutes. So I wanted to kind of wrap things up. And if you want to tell people how they can find you and about your programs and things, that would be great.
Sure. drkeesha.com, drkeesha.com. And I think we're going to do a webinar for your audience after your event is over, and we'll go into more detail about this. I know it's a short period of time to talk about a huge subject. And so I like to offer that, like, we can talk deeper about this for an hour or so, and it's helpful because then people get their questions answered.
Yeah. So look for that below. There'll be a link to get to that on that webinar. And you can hear more about all this great information that Dr. Keesha has. So thanks for joining us today. It was really wonderful talking to you. And yeah.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.